The topic for today came kind of in a strange way, but most topics come in strange ways. And this one came because my husband and I, we've been watching this. We love to watch these Nordic noir murder mysteries. That's like one of our things. And we've been watching this show called Pagan Peak. And it is a very interesting, it's a Austrian-German co-production. And it happens, the whole thing happens in wintertime in the high Alps, right at the border of Austria and Germany. And so in these mountains where the light is always kind of slanted, and somehow every episode is shot in winter, almost everyone. So it's like you can feel the cold. And everything that happens. There's the bleakness, but there's also this beauty of that space. The dark forests, the snow, the waterfalls, the kind of light that comes sideways. And in that place lives a killer. Of course, it's a murder mystery, right? And this killer is interesting because when he kills, he wears something called a Krampus mask. And I had never heard of Krampus before, so I went and did my reading. And it is very, very cool. So Krampus is going to be part of our story today. But what is really interesting, what really stopped me, and I realized that this needed to come in a sermon, is because about first season episode, maybe 2 or 3, there is this time when this killer gives his manifesto. Like, why does he kill? And in my books, he's what I would call an eco-terrorist, in the sense that he really believes that the corporations, the powers that be, do not know how to respect the earth, how to respect Earth's resources. And as I hear, and his deep grief about how the earth is being denuded by the corporations, the mining, the hotels, the tourism industry. And what really stopped me in my tracks is that his words were pretty much word for word what I say. The same pain, the same anger, the same desperation of how the earth is treated. And this man kills for it. And that really, as I said, it really came home to me in a way that intellectually it doesn't happen. It's like you can weaponize anything, including the love for the earth. So going into the story of Krampus, who is Krampus? So if you see the mask in the show, it's actually beautiful. It's like this demon mask. So it has horns and fangs, and it's fierce. And so when I did some reading, I found that there is, on December 5th, there is the celebration in all the alpine villages, like in Austria, in Bavaria, in Hungary, like that whole belt. And they call it Krampusnacht, the night of Krampus. And it is the night when there is a procession, and in the procession there is Saint Nicholas, who brings the gifts. And along with him comes Krampus. And Krampus is kind of the shadow of Saint Nicholas, right? So he has horns, he has goat legs, he carries a chain with him, or he's chained, and and there's bells that ring before he even shows up, so people know the Krampus is coming. And he carries in one hand a switch of like birch to beat up bad kids, and a sack or a basket in which he'll take the bad kid and take them away. So St. Nicholas, his bag is full of gifts, and this Krampus's bag is empty to catch bad children. And Krampus has been, both the church tried to illegalize Krampus, said it doesn't exist. The government tried to stop it, to the point that in 1950s the Austrian government actually distributed pamphlets in these mountain hamlets saying Krampus is an evil man. But he keeps coming back because the people know that for a myth to be true, you cannot just have light. You cannot just have St. Nicholas. You need Krampus as well to make it a real story with teeth. And what is also interesting, and by the way, the horns and the goat legs, it's very, very reminiscent of the old god Pan, the god of wilderness, right? So, and of course the church doesn't want to hear that. And also what is very interesting is that in this, it's called Krampus, I think is the procession that happens where you have St. Nicholas, you have the Krampus, there's a third character. And the third character is an angel. And the angel is like full angel with wings and everything. And the angel does not stop either St. Nicholas or Krampus from doing their work, but is always present as witness. And if the Krampus in that procession becomes a little too identified with Krampus, he steps in and kind of separates the child and the one with the birch switch. I want us to just pause on that for a moment. This is a living myth. It is a myth that has light and shadow and complexity. It is not a greeting card. The problem is we have converted all our deep rituals into greeting cards, where it's all light and no shadow. So the problem with this killer in Pagan Peaks is not so much that he's impersonating Krampus, but that he has isolated Krampus from the entire myth. So there is no St. Nicholas, there is no angel. He has taken on the full myth and hence made it into horror. Myth is supposed to have all the elements. That's how a myth, you know a myth is alive. And so that's a problem. We know it, we understand it. But I also kind of want to point to the opposite of that, which is the celebration of light. Yes, Krampus is the demonification of the person, and that's bad, we know, we agree. What about the opposite of that? If we celebrate only the light, then we hide. In fact, I would go so far as to say the Krampus keeps coming back up, and maybe this person became an eco-terrorist partly because the culture around him cannot hold St. Nicholas and Krampus in the same story. Right? So that's the kind of the issue that we're talking about. So it's very easy for us to assign valence, like this is good, this is bad. But what makes a story live is when everything is at play. And it's not so much about good and bad, but it's more about balance and interchange and share. And like my favorite poet, John O'Donohue, I keep thinking about him, how he talks about the hospitality for shadow. That's his phrasing. And it's just so beautiful. Like we need to have hospitality for the shadow. That's why he talks about like how candlelight or moonlight has hospitality for shadow. Your surgical light does not. And it's important. In a surgical field, you do not want random shadows. But that's a very specific occasion. And again, like any living myth in any culture, Kali from my culture, for example, or the Black Madonnas, or the story of Inanna. Inanna's story is incomplete without her other half, her sister Ereshkigal, who's the queen of the underworld. The story of Persephone. These are all stories that in some ways I would say have, the darkness is the myth's immune system. It's what keeps it alive and potent and functioning. And we lose it at a great cost. I want to offer a quote from Jung, and I have mixed feelings about Jung in many ways, but this is from his Red book, his Liber Novus, which is probably the most honest work of his life and the most deep. And I love this quote because this is what he says. The shadow is nonsense. The shadow is nonsense. It lacks force and has no continued existence through itself. But nonsense is the inseparable and undying brother of the supreme meaning. Yeah, so let's hear that again. The shadow is nonsense, it lacks force and has no continued existence through itself. But nonsense is the inseparable and undying brother of the supreme meaning. You cannot have one without the other. And my own Jungian analyst, the person that I worked with when I was in training, had this saying that the shadow is nothing but physics. You put any solid object in front of light, it'll cast shadow. It's just that. Why do we make such a big deal of it? So this is what I call negotiated ground, because as I get older, I realize that I am done with performance of innocence. Like I want to get to this place where everything is pure and good and utopia. It doesn't exist. What exists is the negotiated ground where I am very aware that the ground that Barbara was speaking about, we are standing on unceded territory that were taken from people without their permission, without payment. That is the ground I'm standing on in a literal way. And in every other way, like everything that I do in my life, nothing is clean, nothing is pure, nothing is above the shadow. And so how do I stand in this negotiated ground, in this negotiated reality where I'm living in this democracy that I do not agree with in so many ways? I bank with the banking system that I do not agree with in so many ways. And I can go on and on. Right now I'm writing a grant for the NIH, and I can tell you stories. But, and that is the reality, that we stand on this negotiated ground. And the negotiated ground is not just, it is not perfect, and no one can say that it has to be the same ground tomorrow. I can work to change the quality of that ground. I can try to move towards justice, but not if I don't first acknowledge that this is negotiated ground. So that's that. And then the only other thing that I want to talk about is the opposite, because I love when a story kind of is supported, or a sense is supported by things coming from different directions. So as I was thinking of the story of Krampus and St. Nicholas, I remembered when I was a kid, I grew up in Delhi, in New Delhi, and the opposite, so this is like the midwinter of the Alps, in high Alps, and I'm talking about the midsummer of the plains of North India. And I don't know if anybody has been in New Delhi in summer. The tar on the street literally boils. You can see bubbles. In fact, I used to live very near one of the largest hospitals of New Delhi, so we had a lot of doctors around us, especially people who worked in the ER. And they said that in the summer, one of the biggest cluster of accidents they see is women with twisted ankles, because they took a step, the heel stayed in the tar and the foot lifted off. So that it's that hot, right? And the air is like dry. There's mirage. I mean, you literally kind of feel that shimmer. And even the straight, so everybody who has any way of staying in the shadow moves into the shadow. Curtains are closed, there are air coolers that are turned on. There's a phenomenon called load shedding, where the government literally like shuts down electricity for a period of time to make sure that electricity can be provided. And they will avoid load shedding at the top of the peak of the heat. So everybody's in the shadows. Even the stray dogs will find like one little shadow of a building and try to press itself into that. And so the memory that I have is, this is summer holidays, and I was probably like, I don't know, 7, 8 years old, 7, 8, 9, something like that. And I remember hearing this plaintive music from the street. And so I stepped out onto our balcony. We were on the second floor, and the balcony is like, the concrete is literally giving up heat. And I have my flip-flops on. This is a little kid. And I stand in the balcony and I see this man walking on the street. And he is a Rajasthani vendor. So Rajasthan is the desert that's not so far from India, but not so far from Delhi. And it's much poorer than Delhi. So often you'll see Rajasthani people will come to Delhi to sell their ware. And so he was selling what's called Ravanahata, which is like a musical instrument. This is handmade, cheap, like sold to kids. So basically you have a bowl that is either a coconut husk or clay. You have one string, it's a single string instrument, and it has a little bow. And the man would just have, like, on his head, he would have a basket with these, and he would be playing one of them and just walking on the street. And that 7-year-old who did not understand the whole politics and so forth, is like, why is this man trying to sell his musical instrument in this heat where nobody's going to come out and buy it? And then the little kid answers to herself that maybe he likes it. Maybe this reminds him of home. Because he comes from the desert, right? So for him, that mirage, that hot sun, that is a memory of home. And that instrument, it's so plaintive. So Ravanahata, by the way, comes the first part. Ravan is maybe that's another sermon at some point. He's the villain, scholar, demon figure. So the whole Ramayana, he's the villain of that story. But he's also a great meditator. He's a beloved of the gods and blessed by the gods and so forth. So people say that this instrument, Ravanahata, which is still played in the streets of Rajasthan and Delhi, is a predecessor of the violin. And apparently Ravan used to play it, as far as the myths go. But again, the thing is, I think what I'm trying to say is what the story of Krampus and St. Nicholas in midwinter in the high Alps is telling us, and what this Rajasthani vendor selling I don't think he's even looking to sell at that point. That is like it's his devotional time. In a way that he may not call it devotional, because it's not prescribed. But he's playing this music. He's in the hot sun with the mirage, and that is his memory of home. Maybe he's thinking of his children. Maybe he's thinking of his wife. So really the invitation today for us is to sit with this image of what happens when we encounter something that so when a child looks at something like this, it's more than witness in the sense of observing in terms of like clinical precision. I think when a child looks at this, that makes the encounter holy, because the child can see this man's story into his heart. And so the invitation today is simply that when we are in a place like that, when we're alone, it's hot, there's nobody, and all we have is a single string instrument, what do? Can we play that instrument? And if we are in a place of the witness, can we really take the risk of coming out from the nice, cool interior and stand witness? That's the angel function in the Krampus story, I think. So that's kind of the negotiating. That is the power, the function that helps us stand on negotiated ground. That says it's not St. Nicholas or Krampus, it is the conversation between the two that makes this ground holy. And that is our invitation today. Thank you.